getting your work done and like making up that stuff. Oh man, so proud of you guys. It is very, very helpful. I don't know where my slide went. Oh, good. That would be because I closed that one down. All right. So as I get my daily slides open again, because I accidentally closed them, any questions from yesterday's activity that are popping out to you guys right from the jump? Go ahead and drop those in the chat. Hi, Vince. Welcome. Hi, Diana. Get down my slide real quick. Sorry about that. Dun, 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 dun. There we go. Okay, so you guys are going to be doing the explain section of your notebook today. So we're going to be looking at notes about natural selection. But before we do, the big thing, hi Celine, that I want to kind of draw your attention to is yesterday's activity, so from Monday and Tuesday, you guys are really investigating the foundations of natural selection. So the effects of genetic variation, reproduction, fitness, adaptations, and how all of that leads to change over time. Okay, so I keep going back to this whole, like this expression, change over time, change over time, change over time, changes in populations over time. Okay, so that actually has a biological term or a vocabulary term that we use in biology. Anybody want to guess what that term is? Okay, bet you could probably figure it out on the slide if you were really paying attention. Hi, Beyonce. So what do you think I mean by change over time? What term do you think represents change over time? Okay, in the chat, you guys can give your guesses. So what term means change over time? So Gavin, you think evolution? Anybody else want to take a stab at it?
Yeah, is it evolution?
Yes, it is evolution. So good job, you two. Close, because our generations are going to go over time. So that's a good connection, though, Benz. So when we're looking at what changes over time, so our generations happen over time. But the concept and the term evolution, this is one of those hot button topics and has a tendency to really drive really conflicting conversations. And it has to do with, I think, in my personal opinion, people's understanding of the term evolution and how it's used. So if you remember from yesterday when we talked about the terms adaptation and fitness, so both of those terms have alternate meanings. So you have your definition in science, but you also have a definition of those terms and how it's used in everyday language, okay? Both are correct depending on your context that you're using them in. So remember in biology, hi Erin, when you're using the term fitness, we're talking about your ability to survive and reproduce in an environment. However, when we use the term fitness outside of science or outside of biology, we could be talking about a number of things. Are you mentally fit? Are you physically fit? So fitness, okay, has lots of different meanings outside of biology. Same thing with adaptation. To adapt outside or have adaptations outside is to adjust, okay? When we're talking about it in the context of biology, it's to have helpful characteristics that help us survive. When we talk about evolution, we're talking about change over time. So in changing environments, specifically when we look at biological evolution, we're looking at how do living things change in changing environments over a long period of time. This has nothing to do with the start of life, okay? So in nowhere when we are talking about biological evolution are we discussing the origins of life, okay? And that's where I think a lot of people, when you see these conflicts and you see these conversations happen, do you believe in evolution, or do you believe in things like creationism, like religion, like the religious understanding of it? A lot of times people are really kind of arguing about apples and oranges a little bit. So when I just wanted to clarify, when we're discussing this piece right here with evolution, it's biological evolution, looking at how populations are impacted by changing environments and how they change over time. Okay, so just know that that's where it's going. And there's lots of different ways that different populations can change over time, or what forces them to change over time. One way in particular that you can see populations, so groups of species, change over time, so to evolve, is through natural selection. Okay, and so in the chat, how many of you guys have heard of that coin slogan, survival of the fittest? Ever heard that before? Yeah. Survival of the fittest is like the catchphrase of natural selection. Okay. So if you could literally give a catchphrase or a slogan to natural selection, it would be survival of the fittest. Okay. Now, when we're looking at that, that is natural selection is one way populations can change over time to drive this overall evolution. Okay. What you guys did in yesterday's activity was look at these foundation pieces. So you actually saw evolution or natural selection taking place. Today's notes are actually going to be here to start naming those different pieces. You're going to start attaching some vocabulary to different parts of it so that you can start to identify the 4 factors that are required for natural selection to be taking place and ultimately drive evolution. Okay, so that's what's going to happen here today. Now, if I go back though, and I go to my notebook, are there any, oh crap, I didn't realize I was sharing a tab. Let me unshare this really quick. Stop presenting. Present now. It's screen. This will be easier to bounce back and forth. Sorry about that. I'm not thinking. Ah, lame. Okay, let's try that again. So let's take a look. Is there any questions from yesterday's activity that you guys want to go over? There we go. Okay. Oop. All right, so you remember the first part, there were 3 driving factors that you guys were looking at for yesterday's activity. The first one was the idea that, okay, so where does all this variation within the population come from? Now, after doing part 1, okay, and working your way through, you should have been able to identify, and you got that first vocabulary term, which was mutation. Now, mutations are changes that happen in the sequence of DNA. Now, if you kind of take what we learned with the first unit and we connect that to what we learned in our last unit, now here's where we're going to see the effects of those 2 things come to light. Okay, now going with the first unit, our DNA sequences. So remember our codes, A's, T's, C's, and G's. Those code, that particular series of A's, T's, C's, nucleotides, those are going to lead to the instructions for making all of our proteins or our genes. Now, if that code changes at all, that change is called a mutation. Okay, now sometimes we get mutations that are going to be harmful to us. So think like a change that causes cancer. Sometimes we get changes that absolutely do nothing. Remember, we have a whole section of our DNA that does absolutely nothing. Okay, but sometimes we get changes in our DNA that might be helpful. Okay, now if a change happens, okay, and it happens to help an individual, that mutation then, remember, because that gene, those genes are passed on to our offspring. Okay, those genes are found in our chromosomes. Those chromosomes are passed to our offspring. Now that mutation is going to be in that next generation, and then maybe in that following generation. Okay, now in this activity, sometimes those mutations that crop up help to increase that particular organism's fitness level. Okay, so if it helps the organism survive in their environment, then that mutation is going to stick around. Okay, big thing though, at no point, okay, can you predict mutations. Now, there are two sources, okay, so far. So if we kind of looked at this last question here, for genetic variation, you had sexual reproduction because you had meiosis and fertilization that were kind of intertwining through there. And we can predict different traits showing up, and that's what we saw through Punnett squares. So we know we have dominant traits and recessive traits, and we can look at probability to see how frequently those traits are going to show up and be present within a population. However, mutations show up as well, and they are absolutely random, okay? And an organism cannot control whether they get a mutation or not. You cannot sit back and be like, oh, I wish I could get a mutation right now that would make my color change, or oh, I wish I could get a mutation that would allow me to do this or that, okay? You can't, it doesn't work like that, okay? So in order for mutations to impact evolution and this change over time, two things have to happen. First off, the mutation has to happen and be passed on through sperm or egg. Okay, and what I mean by that is that you can't get a mutation that happens in your body cells. So think like, I couldn't get cancer, I couldn't get skin cancer in my skin cells, so like in my arm or something, and then get pregnant, so passing on my genes to my offspring, that gene for skin cancer, that mutation that I got from laying out in the sun too much would have to also be in my egg for it to affect evolution. So changes that happen to somebody while they're living don't necessarily impact evolution, okay? The mutation has to be present in the sperm or egg for it to impact evolution, because it has to be passed on to the next generation, okay? And then the next thing, the organism has no control over it. It's completely random, okay? Completely random. Once they're passed on though, that's when we can start to use our math skills and those probability and those Punnett squares to see how we're going to see it show up or hang around and in what amounts in the population after that fact, okay? Questions on mutations, or as just focusing on that they're a source of variation. So we need to have mutations bring in these new traits.
Don't really have any questions.
Good. Okay. Next section, you guys were looking at comparing the fitness levels for different organisms. So basically, are all organisms created equal in terms of their fitness level? And the big answer to this one is absolutely not. Okay. Remember that coin phrase, survival of the fittest. So this is a big competition here. Organisms compete against each other. So the ones that have the desired traits, that inherit those undesired traits, are going to be the ones that are able to survive the longest to then pass on those desired traits to their offspring. So in this, okay, when you guys were looking at those fitness levels, so on slide 10, that chart, I didn't add any of my data because your data should be different. But what I did add were these two trends. So the values for each of these, so the values for your average fitness at the beginning and the average fitness for each of your survivors. If you did the assignment, you should notice that your values increase as your generations increase. So as you move along generation after generation, you should have noticed that the fitness, the average fitness, should have also increased for both. Meaning that fitness improves as that species carries on through time. Okay, as time increases, fitness increases. Okay, big thing here though, as you guys were doing that, that only holds true as long as that environment didn't change. So your fitness level will only stay constant or increasing and improving as long as this environment, so in this case, your background. So if I set this here and I just set my speed to go. So if I started at so notice I already went to 346 generations. I started with roughly a 50% fitness rate, which means that my little guys here had about a 50-50 shot of surviving. Notice I'm all the way up now to a 96%. That's pretty good. Okay, and these guys, like that one's a 97, that one's a 97. These are a 93, so they vary slightly. So we have some variations. Okay, they're not all exactly the same. However, some are a little bit more, have a little bit more fitness than the others. Okay, because they've got different gene combinations. Their blend is a little bit different. But over time, and if the environment stays steady, okay, the population is going to adjust. It's going to pick up those adaptations, and those adaptations will eventually spread and become the norm. Okay, now the big thing here is the environment has to stay constant. If the environment changes, all of a sudden, these guys lose their ability to hang. They went from a 97%, 96%. Now they're back down to a 62. These guys will get picked off like a bad habit. So it's all these concepts right here when we talk about natural selection. Okay, think natural nature. Nature is the deciding factor. The environment. Nature decides who's the winners and who's the losers. Okay, in this example right here, okay, these guys get to be the winners. But if all of a sudden the environment changes and this environment turns purple, well, ruh-roh. These guys are not the favored ones anymore. And this population would struggle to continue existence. Okay, not to say that it couldn't, okay, but it took 346 generations to get to that 96%. That's a long time. Okay, so that's where that over time piece comes in. Questions about that concept, which really ties in together both of these, because you should notice that, or you should have noticed that on both of these charts that you did, so the how does population change over time, because those future generations collect all of those helpful mutations and helpful adaptations, their fitness levels will continue to increase over time. Okay. All right, I'm gonna hold off on going through slide 12 because I wanna look at that one in your notebook for each of you guys. So if you haven't had a chance to complete this one, go ahead and I want you to do that. But for today, you guys are going to be, like I said, you guys are gonna be completing your note section. And instead of having 6 slides to do, you get 1. Woohoo! 1 slide. You guys are going to be using a Nearpod today, so you got a little collection of stuff I want you to look at, and you guys are going to be using that to complete slide number 14 in your notebook. So on the right-hand side of slide 14, you have the 4 factors that impact natural selection. So I want you guys to add some notes about what is natural selection, some key features. And then I want you guys to define each of the 4 factors that support natural selection. Make sure in your description, when you're describing it, tie it back up to natural selection. Okay, so please just don't Google this, tie it back up. In the reading that I give you, okay, the descriptions will all align back up to natural selection. So you can use that as your resource. On the left-hand side, you're then going to label each of the diagrams for, and each one represents one of the 4 factors that make up natural selection. So what is change over time, variability, heritability, and reproductive advantage, okay? Now in Google Classroom, under the lesson 3 post for natural selection, you guys have all of the information that you guys need. Okay, within the, so you have the link for the Nearpod. Sorry, I usually like to put it on top, but I was made aware that the link wasn't working. So I had to remove it and then repost it. So it's down here at the bottom. If you hate Nearpods, you're like, ugh, gross. Okay, what I did is I added all of the materials in here for you. So you have the video. You guys can, I want you to watch that first, followed by a short reading. There's 2 copies of the reading here. Pick the one that's most appropriate for you. So I have an English version and I have a Spanish version. Then the third thing I have is a interactive tutorial, just like you guys have seen before. So the video, each one of these has a different purpose. The video is going to introduce the concepts for you and talk about how it connects to the idea of evolution and compares it to some of the other ways we see evolution take place. So pretty interesting. The next one, the reading, is going to do a more of an in-depth overview of the 4 factors. Okay, so the heritability, variability, reproductive advantage, and what was that last one? Mutation. Okay, where's that? And then when you guys are doing the interactive tutorial, that one's going to be more practice problems. So you're going to be running through scenarios and it's going to talk about, okay, is it natural selection that's taking place or is it not? Which is going to be a really great practice for our activity tomorrow, where we're going to be doing some scenario work. So you guys are going to be kind of playing out and determining, yes, it is natural selection, or no, it isn't, and coming up with explanations as to why it is or is not. Okay. Make sure you attach your certificate to the assignment for the interactive tutorial. Okay. But then use that information to just complete slide number 4 or 14, not 4. 14. Okay. Questions on the to-do?
Nothing.
Okay, guys. You guys are free. I don't know why this always wants me to say LinkedIn, correct it all the time. You guys have the rest of the class period to go ahead and start working on section, the explain section in slide 14. Please make sure you're doing your work. I will have your notebooks graded by the end of the day. If you haven't finished slides 6 through 12, make sure you get those wrapped up as well. If you have questions you want to walk through, go ahead and stick around and I will get those answered for you. Otherwise, you're free to go jump into your independent work time. I will be on here till 3:10, so if you have any questions, feel free to jump back in. Other than that, have a gorgeous day, my people, and I will see you tomorrow.